At the hearing, the judge called the acts cold-blooded, handing him 3 life terms with 40 years before any chance at freedom. Based on that ruling, he's stuck behind bars with no hope of a parole hearing until the year 2041. This tragedy rocked the entire country, not just for the sheer brutality, but for the twisted reasons behind the whole thing. A normal-looking college kid from a quiet neighborhood had actually turned on his own flesh and blood with deadly intent. Over 20 years have passed. Yet the North Ride incident stands as one of the most haunting family massacres in national history. Today, Seth Gonzalez is still locked away within the New South Wales prison system, where he'll likely stay for many decades before he ever sees daylight. Comparing these different stories reveals a pattern that's much deeper than just a list of random crimes. It's how often they shatter our ideas of where real danger hides. Violence struck behind closed doors, in busy plazas, and even in sanctuary spots where safety was usually a given. In many instances, clear warning signs or missed opportunities existed before the truth came out, proving that Australian crime isn't always just random. It usually boils down to moments where details were ignored or misunderstood until it was too late, which is why these stories linger long after the news cycles end. Looking back at all the cases we've touched on, which one grabbed your attention the most or felt truly impossible to wrap your head around? Share your perspective in the comments section, as I love reading how these different tragedies resonate with each of you. Also, if there's another mystery from Down Under that needs more attention, please feel free to give me a heads up. Most of the content I create here is actually inspired directly by the ideas you send my way. If you're into deep dives and well-documented true crime, hit that subscribe button so you're always in the loop. I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Down Under, most crimes don't become national talking points. They occur quietly, get brief coverage, and then just drift away. Yet, every so often, a specific tragedy hits a nerve. It grips the entire country, taking over headlines and forcing everyone to pay attention. Not merely because of the act itself, but rather the dark truths it unearths beneath the surface. Welcome back. Today we are diving into authentic cases that didn't just rattle Australia, but overhauled how people viewed law, fairness, and safety. These are the accounts that fueled massive public anger, invited tough scrutiny, and occasionally acted as catalysts for tangible societal reform. And in several instances, the fallout ignited debates that resonated way past the actual courtroom verdicts. While you tune in, I want to know where you're watching from. Also, what time is it over there? Post that below. I check every message. If you enjoy deep dives into real, meticulously researched true crime stories, hit subscribe because there is plenty ahead. Let's jump in. The Truro killings. South Australia, 1976 through 1977. On April 25th, 1978. During Anzac Day, a man foraging for mushrooms in the thickets near Truro unearthed a secret that revealed a nightmare. Tucked away in the brush, he spotted human skeletal remains. Authorities arrived quickly to tape off the scene. They eventually confirmed the body belonged to 18-year-old Veronica Knight, missing for over 12 months. That initial find acted as a gateway, pulling detectives into a much wider, more terrifying investigation. Throughout the next few weeks, additional bodies started turning up all over the rural South Australian countryside, proving that various young girls were slain and dumped in the backwoods. When the dust settled, police tied 7 distinct murders to this case. The casualties included Veronica Knight, Tanya Kenny, Juliet Makita, and Sylvia Pittman, Vicky Howell, Connie Odanis, along with Deborah Lamb. They were all youthful, mostly teens, who vanished while solo trekking between late 1976 and early 1977. These homicides were eventually pinned on a pair of men named Christopher Worrell and James Alexander Miller. Worrell, born in 1954, was just in his early 20s. Miller, arriving in 1940, was 14 years older. Even so, police concluded Worrell led the duo. The earliest recorded casualty in the sequence was Veronica Knight, who went missing on December 23rd, 1976. Much like the others, she was thumbing for a ride, a standard practice in that region back then. Someone grabbed her, drove her to the sticks, and killed her. Her remains stayed hidden until April 1978. Just a week later, on January 2nd, 1977, 15-year-old Tanya Kenny vanished. Her file became unique since her corpse wasn't dumped in the woods, but was instead interred in a Wingfield backyard, highlighting a total shift in how they ditched the evidence. By January 21st, 1977, 16-year-old Juliet Makita was gone. Then on February 6th, another 16-year-old named Sylvia Pittman went missing in the same way. The spree was gaining terrifying momentum. On February 7th, 26-year-old Vicky Howell vanished. A mere 48 hours later, on February 9th, 16-year-old Connie Jordanes also dropped off the map. The last identified target, 20-year-old Deborah Lamb, disappeared on February 12th, 1977. They eventually found her in Port Gawler. These killings happened so fast and furiously that the link only surfaced once the remains were recovered. Most targets were last spotted thumbing for lifts along highways, which left them completely exposed to any predator passing by. Cops eventually figured out that Christopher Worrell was the one snatching these girls while they were traveling solo on the road. He would steer them out to the desolate farmlands north of Adelaide before committing those heinous acts. Later on, James Miller helped dump the remains, frequently tossing them into the dense scrub near Truro or similar lonely spots. Back then, nobody realized these missing persons cases were actually linked. Every disappearance was treated as its own thing, and with no obvious connection, the bigger picture stayed completely invisible. Everything shifted after that April 25th, 1978 discovery. Once they knew it was Veronica Knight, police started digging through old missing files. The parallels across these files grew impossible to ignore. Detectives began charting out chronological data, specific spots, and the overall MO, which revealed a definite trend of girls vanishing while in transit. The spotlight eventually fell on Christopher Worrell. The problem was, he'd already passed away. Back on February 19th, 1977, Worrell perished in a vehicle wreck near Snowtown, South Australia. Initially, his demise was chalked up to a simple wreck, as he hadn't yet been flagged for any violent offenses. Since Worrell was in the ground, authorities pivoted to his inner circle. James Miller was at the top of that list. As police probed his link to Worrell and the string of disappearances, their suspicions intensified. On May 23rd, 1978, they picked up James Miller. Under pressure, he spilled details that pointed cops to other places where they stashed bodies. While recovery crews combed the outskirts of Truro and the nearby hills, more skeletons were dug up, validating the scale of the massacre. The probe ultimately determined that Christopher Worrell was the primary executioner in these slayings. James Miller played a heavy hand in supporting those atrocities, though Worrell's death before discovery meant he escaped the courtroom entirely. Miller eventually faced the music, standing trial before the South Australian Supreme Court for his involvement. In 1979, he was found guilty of 7 homicides, held accountable for every life lost through the law of common purpose. He received a life term and stayed behind bars until his final breath. Throughout those decades, he insisted he wasn't the actual killer, blaming his actions on Worrell's dark charisma. Despite his excuses, the legal system maintained that his participation made him every bit as guilty as the mastermind. On May 4th, 2008, Miller succumbed to liver cancer while incarcerated, closing a dark chapter that haunted South Australia. 7 young women vanished in a heartbeat, leaving their families in an agonizing limbo for over a year. Because their bodies weren't located right away, the true horror of what happened stayed buried until 1978. Even now, people still talk about the sheer vulnerability of those girls, the desolate places where they were dumped, and the frustration that the main perpetrator never saw a day in court. The 2003 disappearance of Daniel Morum in Queensland. On August 13th, 2011, Queensland detectives hiked into the Glasshouse Mountain brush following leads from a secret sting. In a secluded spot, forensics teams started digging where a suspect had pointed them. Within a few hours, they found clothing and skeletal remains later identified as 13-year-old Daniel James Morum, missing for nearly 8 years. The find validated the police's long-held theories and marked a massive shift in one of the country's toughest child murder cases. Their prime target, Brett Peter Cowan, was finally tied directly to the boy's death. Daniel Morum entered the world on December 19th, 1989, raised by his folks, Bruce and Denise, on the Queensland Sunshine Coast. Everyone knew him as a bright, active kid who loved his skateboard and being outside. By 2003, he was a student at Palmwood State High and regularly caught the bus around the area. On Sunday, December 7th, 2003, Daniel headed out from his Palm Woods home, intending to hit the Sunshine Plaza Mall in Maroochydore to pick up some holiday gifts. He trudged to a bus stop on Nambour Connection Road, right by the Keel Mountain overpass, where construction had shifted the route. Right around 1:35 in the afternoon, a bus rolled by, and the driver spotted Daniel standing under that bridge. Since the schedule was behind and the stop was just a makeshift one, the driver kept going, figuring the next bus would grab him. That split-second choice became a major pivot in the investigation. People nearby confirmed that the boy was still there after the bus pulled away. Between 1:35 and roughly 2:10 that afternoon, he simply vanished. Some folks later mentioned a sketchy car near the bridge, but the details didn't match up enough to spark an immediate arrest. When Daniel didn't show up that evening, his parents panicked, calling around to see if anyone had seen him. They called the cops that night. Authorities moved fast, scouring the area where he was last seen standing. They searched along the main road, the thick woods, and all the nearby land. A small army of volunteers helped out, but they couldn't find a single shred of evidence. As the days stretched into weeks, the whole state of Queensland was on edge. Tips poured in, and detectives talked to anyone who might know something. One of those early interviews involved a man named Brett Peter Cowan, a local guy with a four-wheel drive who had been lurking in the area that day. They grilled him in 2003 and 4, but he had an alibi and they lacked the proof to cuff him. The case went cold for years. Investigators never quit, though, constantly rechecking files and chasing down every fresh lead. Daniel's parents turned their grief into advocacy, making sure the public didn't forget, while police worked quietly behind the curtain. Things finally broke wide open in 2010 when the task force zeroed in on Cowan. Instead of a standard bust, they kicked off a high-stakes undercover sting called Operation PI-8. They used the Mr. Big tactic, where undercover cops act like a powerful crime syndicate to win a suspect's trust. Over many months, these undercover agents befriended Cowan, slowly bringing him into their circle through staged crimes. Every move was scripted to perfection, ensuring the officers stayed in character so he wouldn't get suspicious. During one meeting in August 2011, Cowan spilled the beans. The police struck immediately. On August 13th, 2011, Cowan was put in handcuffs. They searched the spot he mentioned and finally brought Daniel home. Medical results proved that Daniel's life was stolen the very afternoon he went missing back in 2003. Legal action against Cowan began, leading to a high-profile courtroom battle in Brisbane during 2014. Jurors listened to shocking testimony gathered during a complex undercover sting operation run by authorities. These files contain taped admissions of his dark deeds and helped detectives map out the route to the burial site. On March 13th, 2014, the panel delivered a guilty verdict, resulting in a life term with 20 years minimum. His official status as a dangerous convict means his first shot at freedom won't come until 2031. However, given the horrific details of his actions and his past behavior, most experts believe he will stay behind bars forever. The tragedy left a permanent scar on the nation. After nearly 8 seasons of painful uncertainty, solving the boy's disappearance finally gave his grieving loved ones some peace. His memory lives on through a namesake charity. His folks started to teach kids about staying safe. This cautionary tale is still told across the country to show young people how to stay alert and protected. It has been over 20 years since that summer day he waited at the curb and never came home. The search stands as a landmark police effort, honored for the grit it took to find the truth behind the heartbreak. Regarding the 2022 tragedy in New South Wales involving Mackenzie Anderson, first responders rushed to a Mayfield residence. Inside the apartment, they discovered 21-year-old Mackenzie suffering from brutal, life-threatening wounds. She passed away right there despite medical help, while a toddler in the house miraculously escaped physical harm. Officers quickly tracked down Tyrone Thompson, who had been at the flat, and placed him in handcuffs. What the subsequent probes surfaced was a disturbing narrative that went much deeper than a single burst of aggression. Mackenzie was a local mom who stayed very close to her relatives while raising her little one. She had been dating Thompson until things soured, and by early 2022, friends were terrified for her. The man had a track record of being aggressive toward her in the past, leading to court-ordered distance. Specifically, he was under a strict restraining order when the violence occurred. This legal mandate, known locally as a protective order, was meant to keep him away from her entirely. He had just finished a stint in jail for previously hurting her and was out on supervised release. That freedom began in early March of 2022, just weeks before the fatal encounter. Disregarding the law, on March 25th, Thompson broke his restrictions and showed up at her front door. Once he forced his way inside, he launched a brutal knife assault, inflicting dozens of wounds that the prosecution described as incredibly extensive. This savage act played out right in front of her helpless young child. Sirens wailed as help arrived after frantic phone calls, and the responding sergeant secured the crime scene. Police caught the suspect a few blocks away that afternoon and officially booked him for the killing. As the investigation deepened, a clearer story about the failures in the system started to come together. It turned out she had been living in fear and tried every legal avenue to keep him away. The fact that he was out on parole despite the protection order became the main focus of the inquiry. Instead of a long trial, Thompson eventually admitted his guilt in court regarding the homicide, which shifted the judge's attention toward deciding the proper punishment and looking at the aggravating factors. This review covered his violent history and the sheer cruelty of the final confrontation, plus the timing of his release from prison just before the attack took place. The final sentencing hearing happened at the New South Wales Supreme Court on May 1st, 2025. The presiding judge detailed the timeline, the broken court mandates, and the absolute gravity of the crime. The court weighed the family's loss and the trauma of the child seeing such a nightmare unfold. He received 22.5 years with a requirement to serve at least 15 years and 6 months. With credit for time already served since 2022, his first parole chance is in 2038. He was also tagged as a high-risk violent convict, which changes his prison management under state guidelines. The outcome sparked massive public conversation. Many citizens felt the prison time was too light, while others focused on how the system failed to protect her. People were outraged that Thompson walked free on parole right before he launched the attack. Even though his record of abusing Anderson was clear, it sparked massive debate across the community. This tragedy triggered demands for legal overhauls regarding dangerous criminals, especially those with patterns of domestic abuse. Her mother and relatives pushed for tighter laws to fix parole loopholes and better protect vulnerable victims. Their activism fueled talks about rewriting the statutes throughout the region of New South Wales, focusing specifically on harsher punishments for those who kill an intimate partner or a former spouse. The legal records proved the timeline was undeniable. Thompson gained his freedom in early March 2022. Under a strict no-contact mandate, he ignored the judge and violated the terms within mere weeks. Then he committed the murder, exposing how difficult it is to track violent predators and keep safety nets from failing. Mackenzie's passing transcended a simple court file, evolving into a nationwide dialogue on how the law identifies red flags. It questioned how threats are evaluated and what moves are necessary to stop future horrors from happening. Activists still cite her name whenever they debate judicial policy changes or ways to keep neighborhoods safe. As of now, Tyrone Thompson is still locked up, paying for his crimes behind bars. Her family remembers her as a devoted mom taken too soon, whose legacy forced the courts to rethink violent offenders. The 1986 Anita Cobby slaying. On February 4th, a local farmer was trekking across a field in Prospect. He stumbled upon a horrific scene. A woman's corpse lay in the weeds, prompting an immediate police response. Detectives quickly identified her as 26-year-old Anita Lorraine Cobby, a nurse who had vanished just 2 nights prior. This grim find set off a massive manhunt, becoming one of the most intense homicide probes in years. Just a few weeks later, the police realized that a group of 5 men shared responsibility for the killing. Born in late 1959, Anita was a vibrant soul raised in Sydney, cherished for her infectious positive energy. Following graduation, she pursued a nursing career, eventually landing a position at the bustling downtown Sydney hospital. In early 1986, she resided with her mom and dad in Blacktown, in the city's western outskirts. She usually took the train home to Blacktown after her graveyard shifts at the hospital ended late at night. On Sunday, February 2nd, 1986, Anita clocked out and started her trek back home after work. After arriving at Blacktown Station around 10 p.m., she began the brief stroll to her family's residence. She'd walked this path countless times, and it typically only took her about 5 minutes to reach home. Simultaneously, a crew of 5 young guys was prowling the neighborhood in a car they had stolen earlier. This pack included John Travers, Michael Murdoch, and the Murphy brothers, who were all local thugs from Western Sydney. While Anita was strolling near the tracks, the group spotted her and pulled their vehicle over to the curb. They snatched her off the street, shoved her inside, and sped away from the station. For the next few hours, the attackers aimlessly circled the western suburbs while keeping Cobby trapped in the car. By the pre-dawn hours of February 3rd, 1986, they arrived at a secluded field by the Prospect Reservoir. They killed her in that isolated spot. When she failed to show, her parents knew a nightmare had begun. They notified the police, reporting her missing immediately. Authorities scoured the vicinity of the train station, hunting for any witnesses who might have noticed something strange. Their deepest fears were realized the next day when her remains were found abandoned in the grass. Forensics experts and detectives set out at once to piece together her final horrific hour. Officers went door to door in Blacktown, begging anyone with information to come forward and help the case. The killing shocked the city, resulting in a flood of hundreds of tips from concerned citizens. One lead pointed to John Travers, whose own relatives grew wary after seeing him act paranoid after the murder. Ultimately, his sister contacted the authorities, providing the specific details needed to pin the crime on the gang. By vetting every piece of intel, the police successfully identified the entire group that had been riding together. Eyewitness accounts and technical evidence built an airtight case against the 5 suspects involved. From February 21st to the 24th, 1986, a wave of police raids swept through Western Sydney. Travers, Murdoch, and the 3 Murphy brothers were hauled in for interrogation regarding those dark February nights. During the subsequent probe, John Travers broke down and spilled the beans on his 4 accomplices. Investigators pieced together the clues showing how the pack snatched Anita Cobby near the train station. They hauled her across Western Sydney before finally reaching the secluded field where they ended her life. The legal battle headed to the New South Wales Supreme Court later that same calendar year. The entire nation watched as the courtroom drama unfolded, with jurors listening to harrowing details about the Blacktown kidnapping. Witness testimony tracked the car's path across various spots leading up to the horrific climax near Prospect. By November 1986, the panel convicted John Travers, Michael Murphy, Gary Murphy, and Leslie Murphy. Along with Michael Murdoch, they were all found guilty of murder. Judge Maxwell handed down life terms for every single man. Making national headlines, the justice stamped their records with never to be released, a stance later solidified by state legislative update. 2001 saw new laws pass ensuring these 5 killers stay locked up forever, completely stripping away any hope for parole. This tragedy deeply scarred the nation, as Anita Cobby's death ignited massive debates regarding criminal justice reform and community security. Tens of years passed with the culprits behind bars. Michael Murphy passed away in prison during 2019, leaving 4 others, including Michael Murdoch. The remaining group is still breathing and serving out their time within the New South Wales penitentiaries. Parole remains off the table for them. The file stands as one of the most infamous probes in the country's past. To the general public, this event lingers in memory due to the sheer brutality and the landmark harshness of the penalties handed down by the bench. Over 40 years on, loved ones and former nursing colleagues still keep the memory of Anita Cobby close to their hearts. Her career in Sydney and the dark days of February 1986 remain etched in history as an incredibly painful national tragedy. The Seth Gonzalez family slayings rocked Sydney in 2001, specifically on the evening of July 10th that year. Authorities walked into a peaceful residence on North Ryde's Malcolm Street only to discover a gruesome tableau that screamed of foul play. Scattered throughout the different rooms lay the lifeless forms of 3 individuals from a single household. Theodore, Mary Loiva, and young Claudine Gonzalez were all slaughtered within their own walls. Yet their son Seth was nowhere to be found. Initially looking like the sole survivor of a massacre, he became the prime suspect in his family's slaying within 12 short months. Moving from the Philippines to Sydney, Teddy built a career in engineering while Mary Louisa managed their home and family life. Those close to them recalled a pair of diligent parents who prioritized their children's schooling above almost everything else. Their boy, Seth, finished his local schooling before eventually signing up for classes at Macquarie University. For a long time, he bragged to everyone about his legal studies and high marks, projecting an image of total success. In reality, it was all a charade. Gonzalez was actually flunking his classes and drifting further away from ever graduating. Rather than coming clean to mom and dad, he started fabricating paperwork to keep his elaborate deception alive. The student doctored his grades, created phony certificates, and even spoofed emails to look like official university correspondence. This ruse lasted for years, until 2001 when he tricked his folks into believing he was ready to graduate. Trial testimony later revealed that he even discussed a non-existent graduation ceremony with his parents to further the scam. Eventually, however, the cracks started showing as his mother and father began prying deeper into his schoolwork. Detectives later surmised that the reality of his academic failure was becoming nearly impossible for him to conceal. Tuesday, July 10th, 2001, started out like any other normal day for the family at their house in North Ryde. Later that night, based on the timeline built for the court case, Seth Gonzalez turned on his own flesh and blood inside their residence. He used a knife from their own kitchen to stab Theodore, then turned the blade on young Claudine. Mary Louisa was beaten with a bat before being knifed as well during the onslaught. The sheer brutality and variety of weapons suggested a long, vicious struggle, after which the killer carefully altered the crime scene. Officers found xenophobic slurs spray painted in blue across the interior walls, including messages telling the family to leave the country. These notes were clearly intended to frame the massacre as a hate crime committed by some unknown intruders. However, as the forensics team took a better look, the pieces didn't fit, there was zero evidence of a break-in, the place wasn't tossed, and all the jewelry remained untouched. The murder weapons were pulled straight from the family drawer, and the paint used for the walls was tucked away inside. Slowly, the spotlight of suspicion turned toward the family's sole survivor. Gonzalez claimed to detectives he'd been away all night and only found the horrific scene upon his late arrival. But soon, investigators began seeing big flaws in his version of the night. While digging deeper, authorities also stumbled upon a massive web of lies concerning his performance at college. Fake grades and phony emails showed just how desperate he was to fake his progress toward a prestigious law degree. Even with these red flags, Gonzalez wasn't locked up yet, as the probe dragged on for several months. Investigators pored over lab results, bank records, and tips while the suspect continued to live life as a free man. During the following months, he blew through the family inheritance on new outfits and nights out, acting like nothing had happened. His carefree attitude was a chilling departure from the bloodbath that had occurred within his very own living room. A particular scene at the memorial service for his parents and sister would later come back to haunt him. Poised right in front of the three caskets, Gonzalez sang a soulful rendition of One Sweet Day by Mariah Carey and Boys II Men. Mourners initially saw it as a touching farewell, but following his capture, that performance took on a much more sinister tone. As the heat turned up, the task force kept piecing together the exact events of July 10th. Every shred of proof seemed to point squarely at the Sun as the attacker. Almost 11 months since the massacre, the law finally moved in for an arrest. On June 13th, 2002, Seth Gonzalez was formally booked on 3 separate murder charges for the deaths of his father, mother, and sister. By 2004, the legal battle reached the Supreme Court of New South Wales for a high-stakes trial. The jury listened to grim details regarding the faked crime scene, the hateful slurs on the walls, and the murder weapon. Evidence also came out about his long-running academic lies and the crushing weight he felt as his secret world fell apart. Lawyers argued he was terrified his folks would soon learn he'd flunked out and realize those school papers were actually nothing but total fakes. The state's theory was simple. He killed them just as his house of cards was falling down. After weeks of debate, the 12 jurors reached a decision in October 2004, finding Seth Gonzalez guilty on all 3 counts of murder. 3 days after the murders, he stood at their caskets and performed a song in front of mourners. He was convicted 3 years later on all 3 counts. In 2022, Mackenzie Anderson was stabbed to death by her ex-partner Tyrone Thompson. He was under a restraining order. He had just been released from prison weeks earlier for previously hurting her. She had done everything right. She went to court, she got the protection order, she reported the abuse, and the system still let him reach her front door. Across 5 different cases spanning 5 decades, the same pattern emerges. Missed connections between cases, gaps between a known threat and action taken, and victims failed by the systems meant to protect them. The Truro murders went undetected for years because each disappearance was treated as isolated. Daniel Morecambe case went cold for 8 years. Mackenzie Anderson case had a documented paper trail of danger. Most preventable tragedies are not caused by a lack of information. They are caused by failing to connect information that was already there. Hitchhiking patterns, a known abuser on early release, a student faking transcripts while family pressure builds. The warning signs existed in every one of these cases. What changed outcomes, when anything did, was a single person deciding to act. A sister who called police on her brother. An undercover officer who spent months earning a killer trust. These cases also drove real change. The Anita Cobby verdict reshaped sentencing law. Mackenzie Anderson death reignited demands for parole reform for domestic abusers in New South Wales. If you know someone in a dangerous situation at home and they have already involved the courts, do not assume the paperwork is enough protection. Stay close, stay alert. Subscribe for more case breakdowns from Australia and around the world. These stories matter not just as history, but as a guide for what to watch for next. These are the Australian cases that did not just shock the public. They forced the entire country to rethink its laws, its institutions, and where danger actually comes from. In 1976 and 1977, 7 young women vanished while hitchhiking across South Australia. Their remains were not found until 1978, more than a year later. The primary killer, Christopher Worrell, died in a car accident before police even connected the cases. He never faced a single charge. In 2003, 13-year-old Daniel Morecambe vanished from a bus stop on the Sunshine Coast. Police suspected Brett Cowan for years but could not build a case. They ran an undercover operation for months, built a fake criminal network, earned Cowan trust, and waited. In 2011, he led them to Daniel burial site himself. In 1986, Anita Cobby was abducted from near a train station, a 5-minute walk from her home. 5 men were convicted and sentenced to never be released. In 2001, Seth Gonzalez killed his entire family the night his years-long lie about graduating law school was about to unravel. He had faked grades, certificates, and university emails.